What are some declassified government documents that are surprisingly terrifying? When the Space Shuttle Challenger was destroyed, it was reported that all 7 astronauts were killed instantly. It was revealed decades later that some, if not all of the astronauts survived the initial explosion, as the cockpit cabin had enough protection to not be breached. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they were awake and aware, as they plummeted toward the Atlantic Ocean. Understandably, NASA knew that the news of their terrifying death would have crippled the space program even more than it already was. Devil Eyes. The plan after 9/11 to make figurines that look like Sam bin Laden and give them to kids in South Asia. After it's left in the sun for a certain amount of time, its face would peel off to reveal a demon-like visage with red skin, green eyes, and black markings, basically a demon. The objective was to scare kids and their parents so bin Laden and Al-Qaeda would lose support. MKUltra. Partially illegal, forced mind control experiments utilizing psychoactive drugs, conducted by the CIA in 1950s 60s. More specifically, the death of Frank Olson. Olson was going to expose Project MKUltra. Olson was a CIA employee who was dosed with LSD by his supervisor and then committed suicide 9 days later by jumping out of his hotel window. After an autopsy, there was some evidence found that he was unconscious when he plunged out of the window. CIA invested millions in trying to make cat spies. $20 million to be precise. The Nixon administration had a speech prepared for if the moon landing had failed, and it's chilling. There are over 50 mishaps with nuclear weapons by the US Air Force in the 1950s alone. Operation Midnight Climax. The government hired ex-workers to dose Johns with LSD for research purposes, so to speak. Boeing X-37B unmanned space shuttle. It just spent 720 days in space doing God knows what. Canadian here. The Somalia affair, not sure if it was ever classified but definitely a horrific scandal. A now disbanded division of the Canadian military torturing a kid to death in the 90s, and taking hero pics with him while doing it. I think it's important to remember when your country does something shitty, it's not always the bad guys who can be freaking evil. Surprised no one has mentioned the Panama Papers. They've been out for a while, but there's been little coverage of them. Too long. Didn't read of them. Lots of money laundering that was tracked pointed to major governments and global businesses. Edit. Amazon Prime has a series called The Giant Beast that is the global economy. They talk about the Panama Papers in a couple episodes. Also Paradise Papers, the elite of this world money laundering and essentially hoarding wealth. I wonder why the media coverage was super slim. HMMMMM. Operation Northwoods. A plan for a false flag operation that came from the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Department of Defense in 1962 and given to JFK, who turned it down. The plan called for the CIA to commit terrorist actions against us civilians across the United States and frame Cuba, allowing us the right to invade and oppose Castro and the communist government there. It was declassified and can be found online at the JFK Library. Terrifying that no one knows or seems to care that this was suggested by our government to the president. My hometown was littered with radioactive waste by the federal government as part of the Manhattan Project. Then we wonder why cancer and thyroid conditions are the norm. Project Sunshine, where the US government bought remains of dead infants to test for radiation. When they took limbs from them, the parents were never told. One mother wasn't allowed to dress her daughter for her funeral because doctors had removed her legs and didn't want her to find out. Not declassified documents, but the discovery of the Tuskegee syphilis study on unwitting black American males was pretty freaking horrific. Can't remember the source, but apparently there is a legit order signed by Hilter to his nuclear researchers saying if they have a viable nuclear explosive, start loading into V2s immediately. I don't think it's classified, but Project Thor, using a satellite bomber to bomb a city. Imagine a missile or a bomb coming from space, and before you know it, your city is destroyed by a falling missile bomb. It was called Rods from God. Basically it would have used kinetic energy, no explosives. It would have used a series of 2,000-pound tungsten rods to destroy and vaporize without the radiation of a nuclear bomb. It was only avoided because we signed treaties with the Russians not to weaponize space. New Zealand's UFO files are a bit creepy. I was in the library and stumbled across the bound files. There's a lot of assumed crazy people being crazy, but there's also one specific one that stood out from respectable Air Force pilots who were both in the air. Conducted mini tests, for example blinking, moving the plane in relation to the object, verifying what he saw with the co-pilot to ensure it wasn't an illusion or his mind. I don't know, just the fact that you'd assume he wasn't crazy creeps me out so much. Not declassified but leaked. Operation Yellowhammer. The government tried to say it was old, but it had an August date on it. It's the UK government's plan for the eventuality of a no-deal Brexit. Basically life in the UK would be turned upside down for a few months. Food and medical shortages are expected. The royal family might be evacuated to a safe place. Police will have too much on their hands to investigate crime, etc. Edit. It's not a worst case scenario, it's a realistic assessment. The US government did a few different messed up experiments with radioactive materials on people without their knowledge to see the long-term effects. Like what, Jormung under 315? Oh, just feeding radioactive material to mentally disabled children and enlisting doctors to administer radioactive iron to impoverished pregnant women. One US bomber accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb a short distance from a major US city, can't remember which. But luckily it didn't detonate. CIA involvement in starting the Guatemalan Civil War, which lasted 36 years and led to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of indigenous people. In East Germany, a committed freedom fighter and her husband had dealt with having her home raided while she was away, being arrested on the way to protests and all sorts of state-sponsored harassment. After the wall fell, she was able to read the documents the Stasi had kept on her and found out her own husband was an undercover agent and had written many reports on her activities with a bloodless banality. British Metropolitan Police Services have done exactly the same on ecological protesters from organizations like Greenpeace. There was literally a case a few years back, like 5 years ago, an undercover cop I believe married, and even had kids with a protester he was investigating the whole way through. As a part of the Army and CIA's experiments into mind control, they put electrodes into the pleasure centers of dogs' brains. Initially, they wanted hundreds of dogs. They only actually got 10, and of those only a few were implanted. The ones which were would be remote controlled by zapping them and essentially giving them a dose of dopamine when they were facing the right direction. The controllers would stop the dope zap when they wanted the dogs to stop, and then the dogs would reorient themselves until they were facing the correct direction. This meant when the controllers weren't present, the dogs who had been implanted would continually spin in circles, even in their cages, always looking for the direction that gave them that next hit. The program ran out of funding in the mid-60s, and the dogs were destroyed. If you want to read all about it and other things that the US and governments around the world are up to from the horse's mouth, I highly recommend theblackvault.com, the website of user Black Vault. Here's 100-ish pages of what I described above, helpfully FOI'd and archived thanks to his hard work. Edit for some bright side. Via the same source we get remote control of war dogs, remotely controlled scout dog, June 1974, wherein we learn that we can just train dogs. They respond to audio and visual cues, and can be trained to turn on command at long distances by playing a tone. The site is run by a guy named John Greenyold. User Black Vault. Started putting in FOIA requests when he was 15 and never stopped. Currently has what is arguably the largest privately owned collection of declassified information from the US government anywhere, and the entire archive is accessible for free. Not a direct answer to your question, but anything you want to know about stuff the US government was up to can be found buried in there, and he's taken the time to sort some of the more interesting stuff out to make browsing easier. Cheers. That's all for today's video. Hope you guys liked it. If you liked the video, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, The best thing you can do is simply watch the videos, but if you really want to see the channel thrive, subscribe, like, comment, add to favorites, add to playlist, and share with friends. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Reddit and Insta. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you with tomorrow's upload.